If the question is what is morality, my answer would be morality is like the rules to a board game. Are you moral is answered by comparing your behaviour to those rules. If you think of morality like this, then you can see that there are different moral codes in existence, and those different rules produce different effects. The choice of rules to follow, the choice of which moral code to follow, really depends on what you want to achieve out of it. Just in the same way a game designer might set up the rules to make a game more fun, a person designing a moral code might set up the rules to bring about, for instance, human flourishing. The want of the designer, or the outcome that they desire to achieve, may be based on reason and logic, but the fundamental foundations will be one or several base desires, or axiomatic desires, pre-installed, if you like. The conclusions about what rules or what morality to follow may come out different as well, depending on what you hold to be true about the world. Okay, so what are these axiomatic desires? I would say they are like pre-installed drives that have been selected for by natural selection. So examples would include things like empathy, the desire for safety, or the desire for intimacy as well, for instance. These fundamental desires could be thought of as well as coming in a whole host of predetermined settings. For instance, your empathy might be high or low. If you're a serial killer, for instance, you might have no empathy. They also are likely, you can tell from introspection if you just think about how you feel about things, that some of these desires may also compete with each other. So you get feelings of ambivalence because you have mixed feelings about something. The fact that these axiomatic desires do exist, and the likely reason why they exist is because natural selection has selected for them, they are probably very likely a large share of the responsibility for our rise to dominance on the planet. So what rules should we create and follow? This depends on what desires you ultimately have. It cannot be answered easily. Problems like competing desires cause problems. This would also make statements like, I want to fulfill all my desires, impossible, because we do have competing desires. So I suggest we should really try and focus on practical morality. Imagine I want the best food and resources for myself and my family, as well as wanting to be free from danger and wanting my children to find intelligent and healthy partners so that they also can become fulfilled. These three competing desires act to constrain my choices. I could decide the best way to get food and resources was through warfare and pillage and other peoples, but this would interfere with also wanting to be free from danger. I could also attempt extortion and murder and dishonesty at home, but this would likely lead to danger and reduce my children's likelihood of meeting nice partners. The best solution to these competing desires seems to be to educate my children to be civil and patient, and to work hard and be productive myself so that I can generate value and then trade this with other people for resources. Ultimately, by considering one's offspring and their potential future offspring, and even their potential future offspring as well, so your great-great-grandchildren, for instance, it forces you to make decisions from behind the veil of ignorance, as you cannot know for certain what their aptitude or station in life is going to be. So what is the veil of ignorance? The veil of ignorance is an idea that the perfect moral code could be thought up. If you could get, say, 20 people, maybe delete their memory of who they were, even to the point where they wouldn't even know if they were male or female, and then ask them to come up with the rules for society and ones that they would be happy with and think were fair. And the idea being then that they could never come up with something that was truly unjust or unfair. And what I'm saying here is that since you cannot know whether your children are going to be male or female, whether they're going to be clever or not, or if they're going to be good athletes or not, for instance, then you should consider the position of, say, maybe a person less fortunate and do something about it. It is definitely a truism that people will sacrifice and work for their children and their grandchildren. Considering your ancestors that precede you in 1,000 years' time might encourage us to form a form of moral responsibility that current schemes do not. It appears that our inherited desires have driven our success as a species might in the end lead to our downfall. Our desire for status, often exploited by advertisers and manufacturers, leads us to excessive consumption and a failure to regard the environment. What might considering your future ancestors in 1,000,000 years do? What's beyond practical morality? I actually don't believe you need anything more than this. So to illustrate that, I'm going to give a few examples. So imagine a case like this. Case number 1. How does practical morality deal with animal rights, for instance? Let's imagine my neighbour decides that his new hobby is torturing dogs. You might think that since my ancestors will never be dogs, I have no objection. Obviously, I find the idea revolting, but why do I? I think that a person who gets pleasure from, say, kicking a dog is not getting pleasure from the physicality of the attack. If so, it would be a lot cheaper and easier and less noisy to buy a punch bag. No, they must get pleasure from exercising deadly control over a sentient being. Revealing a pleasure of this kind shows a deviance from the normal range of the fundamental desires that natural selection has endowed us with, and that have allowed humans to flourish. This is why we term certain behaviours as humane and inhumane. To be considered inhumane by your contemporaries is quite a disadvantage to yourself and your lineage. A person who has desires like this cannot be trusted to treat humans, vulnerable or otherwise, in a humane way, and may need restrictions placed upon them. The restrictions would have to be acceptable from behind the veil of ignorance. Case 2. What about abortion? Abortion is a good example where the knowledge you hold to be true about the world impacts deeply on the decisions you make. If you believe that life, and I'm assuming that this means sentience or sentient life, begins at the moment of conception, you have to decide whose sentience to favour, the mother or the unborn child. This issue is generally associated with the debate between those of a religious persuasion and those who aren't. A common belief among the Abrahamic religions is that the duality of the human mind. This body and soul model of the mind allows the idea that 32 cells may still be sentient. The idea to an empirical rationalist would be considered, but to be acted upon would need proof, or at least a hypothetical explanation that is consistent with other successful models of reality. To an empirical rationalist, the question of abortion is moot until it would be reasonable to believe that a sentient human being was in harm's way. What would be nice, not needed but nice, if you could ask for a rule to be adopted beyond practical morality? Well, I would ask that anybody at a loose end would be working towards a particular kind of enjoyment. Not out-and-out pleasure. Pure unending pleasure has bad connotations and can be illustrated by a thought experiment. Imagine a world where the most pleasure is had by the most people. What comes to mind? Well, for me, because I'm obviously a bit weird, I can imagine the entire world hooked up to a drip, feeding them heroin of ever-increasing strength. Everybody is ecstatically happy and blissfully so, but it's not the kind of world I actually want to live in. So the particular kind of pleasure I think is highest is fun. Your fun and others. So we should aim to maximise the amount of fun for ourselves and everybody else. Fun is always good. Fun prods dogma. It facilitates learning. It hovers around generally being kind. It allows different people from different backgrounds and ethnic, religious, otherwise, etc. to find common ground and might very well be the meaning of life.